Hey, I'm Andy. Welcome to the Church Basement. This is the second video of multiple videos on the shame cycle. If you haven't watched part one, go check it out. It is linked in the description below. But here's a quick recap. So shame is the feeling we experience when we sense that we have failed to meet an expectation, fallen short of an ideal, or have done something wrong, disgraceful, dishonorable, or unethical. It's what we feel when we're sensing that we don't measure up, we have fallen short, or that we are not good enough. Shame is a universal experience. Everyone feels shame, and it is powerful. Shame has the ability to influence our thoughts and our beliefs, specifically our beliefs about ourselves. We all believe lies about ourselves from time to time, that we're useless, worthless, unlovable, nobody wants us. So we typically react and try to prevent, relieve, and numb the shame and prove those lies wrong. But our attempts don't work, and we end up right back where we started, feeling bad about ourselves. This sums up what we call the shame cycle. So how do we break this cycle? Now, even though it's the shame cycle, avoiding shame is not how you break the cycle. Yes, there are experiences and situations and people you can and probably should avoid in order to limit the shame that you experience, but that's a discussion about boundaries, and that's not what we're talking about here. We're focusing on what to do if you already are experiencing shame. First, you need to understand that shame is not necessarily the problem. Yes, it's uncomfortable, maybe painful, and the experience isn't good, but there is a purpose as to why we're feeling what we're feeling. God has created us so that we would feel shame as a result of sin, which is missing the mark. This can be the first step towards repentance or forgiveness and experiencing His grace. But we also, because we live in a broken world, feel shame when we perceive or we're convinced that we've done something wrong, even when we haven't. Regardless, something has already happened and we're feeling shame. This is where the cycle starts, but where things go wrong is what we do after we feel shame. In the first video, I covered what this looks like. We feel shame and our thoughts are influenced. We believe lies and we react by trying to cover up. We hide, we run from God. The cycle results in more shame. This hurts and hinders us from living faithfully in so many ways. And we saw how this started in Genesis 3 and it's continuing today. When we think about how to break the shame cycle, what we have to understand is that this entire thing is all about disconnection. We all, to varying degrees, have developed tendencies and habits where we disconnect from things that could help us deal with our shame. We disconnect from ourselves, unaware and ignoring what is going on inside us. We disconnect from truth and reality by believing lies. We disconnect from others by hiding who we are. And we disconnect from God by relying on our own efforts and attempts to feel better, be better, or escape shame. Basically, when we remain disconnected from ourselves, others, reality, and God, we will remain stuck in the shame cycle. The good news is we can break the cycle. But because we live in a broken and messy world, we're never going to be completely free of shame. So what we do is we focus on learning helpful and healthy ways to deal with shame. And all of this starts with connection. We connect to ourselves, we connect to others, we connect to truth and reality, and we connect to God. By connecting to ourselves, we figure out and acknowledge what we're feeling, what we're thinking, and what we're believing. Signs you're feeling shame: if you feel small, guilty, ashamed, broken, if physically you feel like you need to hide, run, or shut down. Shame is this uncomfortable and even painful experience, so it should be apparent when you feel it, unless you've gotten really good at avoiding it and covering it up. Then you have to do some work at developing the ability to spot it, which only really comes with practice and help. If you're not clear on what you feel, your thoughts can be a pretty good indicator. Shame can lead to thoughts like, I screwed up, I messed everything up, I don't know what I'm doing, I don't know how to be a dad. Those kind of thoughts are evidence that shame is starting to bubble up within you. Those thoughts about what you did can start to become thoughts about who you are. I am a screw up, I am a mess up, I am a bad dad. When these thoughts hang around our head long enough, they become false beliefs, meaning you start to accept them as truth. When we connect with ourselves, we're basically just trying to figure all this out. It's simply identifying and being able to acknowledge the stuff that's going on within us rather than ignoring it or denying it or minimizing it. Now, some people call this mindfulness, which is basically when you just observe your thoughts and your feelings and your beliefs and withhold any type of judgment or condemnation. The stuff going on inside you, it might not feel good, and the thoughts might not be good, but all you're trying to do is figure out what's going on. So we just ask ourselves questions like, what are we feeling? What are we thinking? What are we believing? I'm currently feeling shame. I'm going over this argument I just had. I'm a crappy husband. When you connect with yourself, you're just trying to figure out and acknowledge what's going on inside you. So we connect to ourselves, and then we connect to truth and reality. What truth should I believe? What happened? Why do I feel the way I feel? When we realize that we're experiencing shame, we need to connect to truth and reality, because shame has this way of accusing us and tricking us into believing lies. So what truth should I believe? Since shame influences how we see ourselves and ultimately affects our relationship with God, we need to focus on the truth about who I am, what is true about me, and what is true about God. This is where we counter false beliefs with gospel truths. Because of what Jesus did, his life, his death, his resurrection, I know I have value to him, and I know that I am loved by him. Because of my faith in him, I know that I am forgiven, I'm accepted, I'm adopted, I'm made new, and I am redeemed. Also, I know because of what Jesus has done, me and God are on good terms. We're reconciled. And no matter what I've done or what I'll do, there is nothing that can separate me from his love. I know that God is in control and his will is good. These truths about our identity counter the lies and the messages from shame. The truths about God remind us that we're ultimately okay, even in the midst of feeling pretty lousy about ourselves. We're reminded we have a perfect Father in God. He's for us. He's not against us. So these truths help us move forward later on when we figure out what we ought to do and resolve the shame of whatever situation we might be in. So we connect to reality and the truth that we ought to believe, but we also connect to reality by asking, what happened? When we connect to reality, something we're trying to do is separate the facts from all the other stuff that can be going on in our minds. This helps us sort through the appropriate responses later, but get a general idea of what is going on. Something we need to understand is that God wired us so that we would feel shame and guilt when we do wrong, when we drift into ways of living that run opposite to how God intended us to live. But because of the fallen nature of the world we're in, we experience shame for all sorts of reasons. So feeling shame doesn't necessarily mean that we did something wrong. So we need to figure out, did I or didn't I do something wrong? So we ask ourselves questions like, what did I do and was it wrong? Was it intentional? Was it an accident? Maybe I made a mistake. Maybe I'm dwelling on something from the past. What is it? Have I been forgiven for it? Do I need to seek forgiveness for it? Or maybe someone said or did something to me that's making me feel shame. What we're trying to do is figure out what happened, what's true. I'll go into more examples of what this all looks like in the next video, but right now we just need to realize that connecting to reality involves acknowledging what happened and who, if anyone, is responsible. Again, shame doesn't automatically mean you did something wrong. It could be the result of wrong, or it could be the result of an accident, a mistake, or someone else doing something. Also, something to keep in mind is that those gospel truths we were focusing on make this easier to acknowledge what happened. Since we know we're loved and we're secure, we have worth, and we're on good terms with God, we can accept whatever we discover here. If we did wrong, it doesn't change who we are. Being connected to those gospel truths actually allows us to see the rest of reality much clearer, because we're not afraid of what we might learn or discover. I don't have to run from any wrong I committed. I can acknowledge it, I can accept it, and I can respond accordingly. We also want to ask ourselves, why do I feel the way I feel? Here is where we connect the dots between what happened and what we're experiencing. This is important because this is where we start to discover our tendencies and our triggers around shame. This is the truth, the reality of how I tend to operate given a certain circumstance or situation. This is especially helpful when you haven't done something wrong. If you simply made a mistake, received some feedback, you were ignored, whatever, it's helpful to figure out why these common things elicit shame. Figuring out the why behind why I feel what I feel took a long time, many years of counseling, and I needed a lot of help. So you might need some help too. But it is important in helping you live in reality. And the more you do it, the more you practice asking yourself, these questions, the easier it becomes over time. So you connect with yourself, you connect with truth or reality, and next we connect with others. When we connect with others, we bring everything we're feeling and thinking and all the stuff we're experiencing, and we bring it into the light by telling someone else. We basically tell them, this is what it's like to be me. So shame can produce a lot of fear around connecting to others. If someone else knew what I was like, what I was thinking, what I did, they'd totally reject me. That's my fear. So we typically avoid connecting to others. The problem with this is that shame has influence, and that influence is very powerful when we isolate and cut ourselves off. But when we bring someone else into our world, my experience is that shame's influence diminishes. The lies of shame tend to lose their grip over you when you open yourself up to someone safe. Someone safe, that's someone who won't condemn you, but they'll respond with grace, acceptance, understanding, compassion, and empathy. To me, there is power and comfort from being known and hearing someone else say, "Me too, I can totally relate, I know what that's like, I'm sorry you're going through this." When you connect to someone like this, the accusations and condemnation you have towards yourself start to fade. Also, there are times where shame is so great that it's nearly impossible to connect with ourselves or truth, and it actually takes another person to help diminish that shame, to get us to the point where we can connect to truth and connect to reality. Sometimes it takes another person to remind you of who you are because you just don't have the ability in that moment. This is a limitation of being human. It's not a weakness. God has said it is not good for people to be alone. I think shame is one of the most important times when this truth is proven. Connecting to others might be the only thing to get you out of the shame cycle and get you asking the right questions and remembering the right truths. Last, but definitely not least, we connect to God. We do this through bringing all we've uncovered through this whole experience to Him, through prayer, through journaling, however you talk to God. So the same way you connect with others and share what it's like to be you, you do that with God. You tell Him what you're feeling, that you're worried, scared, ashamed, angry, sad, defeated, hopeless. You share what you're thinking. Whatever it is, you ask for help, wisdom, forgiveness, grace, comfort, strength, courage, whatever you need so that you can believe and then you can act. Sometimes in the midst of shame, connecting directly to God seems like impossible, unbearable, unthinkable. That's why we run and we hide. Again, we have to remember what is true. The fact that because of the gospel, we're loved by God, we're accepted by God, and we have access to God. When we choose to connect to God, we are choosing to believe the gospel. We trust Him, we trust who He is, what He's done, and what He says is true, and what He's promised to do. We draw near to Him. Our tendency since Genesis 3 has been to run and to hide from God in the midst of our shame, but the good news is we can approach Him without this fear. But this takes trust. In fact, all forms of connecting take trust because connecting makes us vulnerable to what we might discover, what is true, what others might think about us, how they might react to us, whatever. So this is important. I said earlier that shame can be a good thing or a bad thing depending on how we respond to it. If you respond by disconnecting, you'll tend to rely more on your own efforts in order to measure up and counter the lies of shame. You'll turn things, experiences, and objects into idols and turn to them for comfort and validation. But you'll ultimately end up burn out, beat up, and let down, which leads to more shame. Hence, the shame cycle. When we respond this way to shame, it's clearly a bad thing in our lives because it not only hurts us, but it hinders our trust in God. And that's the most important piece of this. So this is the interesting thing about shame. It actually creates an opportunity to deepen our reliance and trust in God, which then allows us to deal with the shame appropriately, counter its influence in our lives, and then we live more faithfully. So it's not that we should seek out things that bring shame to us. Trust me, you don't need to do that. But when it comes our way, we're given an opportunity to respond with trust, which helps us navigate life. We grow, we mature, we live more faithfully. So as I'm walking through this right now, I'm feeling a lot of hope. And I hope you do too, because shame kept me in such a dark place for such a long time. And I never really experienced true connection. I just felt burdened all the time by shame. So I remember a year into my recovery after my life had bottomed out, my close friend asked me, "Andy, what has changed in your life?" And I remember I told him, I don't hate myself anymore. I remember that by connecting to what was going on in me, to the truth, to the gospel, to reality, by being known by others, being open and honest, connecting with God without fear of condemnation, I experienced so much grace, so much healing and acceptance and love that over time, shame started to lose its grip on me. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that this isn't theory. This isn't wishful thinking. This is real. Connection helps us deal with shame and helps us trust God. But we're not done yet. There's one more piece we have to consider when we're thinking about breaking the shame cycle, and that's our response. When I say response, what I mean is the cycle is broken when we choose new, healthy, appropriate responses to shame. In other words, we respond to the truth. When we're caught up in the shame cycle, we react to the lies of shame in ways that numb us or in ways we think will make us feel better. But as we connect and we become more connected people, we experience more grace, we develop a firm identity in who we are, and we gain wisdom and perspective regarding what's going on in us and what's going on around us. We act or respond from this place of grace, identity, and wisdom and address whatever is causing us to feel that shame. So if we've done the work of connecting to ourselves, we determined what happened and why we're feeling what we are. We run it through the filter of truth. We've shared it with others. We talk to God about it. So we can look at the situation with this healthy perspective that enables us to do what we ought to do. So here's a few scenarios. You realize you did something wrong. It could be intentional or not, but you look at what you did and you realize, I shouldn't have done that. That was wrong. Lying, withholding information, yelling, name-calling, overstepping your boundaries, acting out in addiction, acting out of pride, greed, lust, hate, whatever. We've done something that we shouldn't and we feel shame because of it. You realize you made a mistake or an accident. It doesn't mean you're bad. It just means you're human and you still have to take responsibility for that. You realize you didn't do something wrong, but what you did had an impact on someone or some situation. You discover what you did was acceptable. Maybe it was the best choice, but it still affected someone. Things like setting boundaries, telling the truth, confronting someone over an issue, ending a relationship, disciplining a kid. All things that are good, right, and maybe what you ought to do, but other people may not react the way you'd hope. Their response might make you believe you did something wrong when you actually did something right. Maybe you realize someone else did something that is making you feel shame. People can say and do all sorts of things that leave us with this sense of inadequacy and worthlessness and rejection and just feeling shame. The problem isn't us. The problem is what others are saying or doing. And finally, maybe you realize you're just dwelling on the past, something you said or you did maybe even years ago. When we dwell on, obsess over, and fixate on things in the past, it's almost like it's happening in the present when it comes to our mind and what we feel. So in each of these scenarios, what's important is that we determine what is going on that led you to feel shame. That way, you don't react to the messages of shame, you react to what's actually going on. Here's what that might look like. When you feel shame related to a wrong you've done, you examine what you did and you take responsibility, you seek forgiveness, you make amends, you repent, you pray for grace. When you feel shame related to a mistake or an accident, you examine what you did, you take responsibility, you offer to make it right if you can, and if necessary, you seek forgiveness. You seek feedback, you pray for wisdom, you make a plan to practice and improve if possible. If you feel shame related to choices that impacted others but were still necessary, you examine what you did and you remember why you had to do what you did. You consider how the other person is responding. You discuss with someone safe or you get feedback on the situation. If appropriate, have a conversation, hear the person out, listen, and if necessary, let them know what is going on and explain why you had to do what you did. Pray for wisdom. If it's shame related to something someone else did to you, examine the situation, name the lie you're believing, discuss with someone safe. Give the other person responsibility for what they've done or said. Maybe have a conversation with them of what they've done or said. Set a boundary if necessary. Forgive them and seek reconciliation if you can. Pray for wisdom and grace. Whatever the situation, you respond to reality, what's going on, rather than trying to numb or cover up or hide from or offset the shame you're feeling. Finally, there's the result. Once we've acted and responded to what we believe is true about ourselves, the situation, we break the cycle and we start to experience a sense of peace and contentment and joy, relief, confidence, knowing that we did what we could, which is hopefully the right thing, regardless of what shame was telling us we ought to do. So that's how you break the shame cycle. Simple, right? Not at all. Is it easy? No. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of practice. But is it worth it? Yes, because not only do you experience less shame in your life if you start to break the cycle, but you start to do what you ought to do and you trust God more often. And that is the ultimate win. So in the next video, I'm going to try to make it as practical as possible and just look at examples of these shame scenarios and how it would look if someone got caught up in the shame cycle and how they would respond. And then compare that to how someone could break free of the cycle, connect, and start to do the good, right, healthy things. All right, thanks for watching. If you like this content, you can always subscribe and like the videos. But what I'd really appreciate is if you would share this with people you think would benefit. My mission is to create resources that help people live more faithfully. And if you share this, it would be a big help. Thanks.